Once you have downloaded the PDF, basically have a quick glance through it. Now, this PDF contains the two sizes. It contains the mama, or daddy, and the baby. It's listed in here as the mama and the baby, so that is how I will refer to it. So you can see here the difficulty level, the skills that are going to be used, and the size of the two different opossums. Now, I'm going to be making the large size. I personally would recommend using hand stitching for the baby size if you are not extremely proficient on the sewing machine, as even the mother on her own is quite fiddly to do in parts. I'm going to show you a couple of hacks as I'm doing it that mean it doesn't quite look as beautiful as this, but it makes it a little bit easier. Now, I've actually used fur for mine. Again, this is something slightly different to use because I've used fleece in my previous videos. I wanted to show you how to work with fur. You can see here the difference between using a minky and a felt and how the stretch is different on the different fabrics. Now, this says to print the pattern, so you need to go to page 21 and print page 21 to 25. Do not print on both sides of the fabric. Sorry, on both sides of the paper, not the fabric. Otherwise, you won't be able to cut your pattern out. Now, this goes through the different things. Now, one thing I will say with this pattern is that you are going to be crossing the two pieces of paper here. It does go across two pieces of paper. It isn't all on one sheet per pattern piece. It does go across two for one of the pattern pieces. The rest is all on the one piece. You have the applique on the same pieces of paper as you have the pattern, so there's not a piece that you can skip if you have an embroidery machine. As with other ones, you do need to print all the pages out. When you actually open the embroidery folder and you get this open, you will find that there are just one file for each, for your 5x7 and for your 4x4. That's because your 5x7 is for the larger mama, as it's referred to here, or your mummy or your daddy, and then the 4x4 is actually for the baby. So be very, very aware of that depending what hoop size you're using depends on which one you are actually going to create. Once you have all your pieces and you are assembling them, I took the two pieces that were go across the page first and stuck them together on the pieces that didn't have any pattern on them before I covered them in my sticky back plastic. I love my sticky back plastic, in case you haven't watched any of my previous videos, because it actually extends the life of the patterns that are this size. It keeps them from tearing if you're pinning them. It just keeps them alive for that little bit longer. Once I have sticky back plastic my entire pattern, I then cut them out with my trusty little knife. You can use scissors, and I did actually use scissors on a few pieces of this. If you prefer, it is a personal preference and entirely up to you. whilst I'm cutting out the pattern pieces, I have my embroidery machine running to do the parts that are embroidered. Now with this, you only have one embroidery file, so I actually have this embroidery machine running because you should not watch an embroidery machine, because if the needle snaps, it can be very painful when it hits you. So while I'm in earshot when I'm doing my pattern pieces, I can hear the embroidery machine running, so I am technically keeping an eye on it, just not literally keeping an eye on it. So you can let this run. As stated in the video, looking through the PDF that goes with it, you are looking at the 5x7 for the mummy / daddy, or you are looking at the 4x4 hoop for the little baby. As always, once the embroidery is done, you can move to cutting out your fabric. Now, if you are doing applique, I potentially would cut out my fabric first, then add the applique. However, I have the immense bonus of having an embroidery machine, so it's what determines how I'm cutting out the fabric. Once you have your fabric cut out, it is time to take it over to the sewing machine. Here I decided to actually use fur instead of doing a fully fleeced animal. Now, if you aren't going to have seams, or if you're doing it by hand, it is so much easier to work with fur, because if I were you, don't do what I did. I used bigger scissors, and as you can see, it cuts the fur blunt. You can use smaller scissors. You can actually use embroidery scissors are best here, and you can cut underneath the fur. This means that you are getting a much fluffier finish. It means that it's not really going to be blunt around the seams. You can also make sure that your fur around the seams is lying the other way, so brush it away from the seam. This will save you trying to unpick the fur from in the seam later on, because basically you're not sewing the fur flat into the seam. Over to the sewing machine. Now, when I get over to the sewing machine, if there's fiddly bits like the arms and the legs and the claws, that's what I do first. Now, I sewed the claw as it says to sew the first time. I messed up, and so I could actually poke something through the claw when I turned it the right way. Now, how I remedied this is I sewed from the claw down into the hand. This actually held this part the right way round. So, if you aren't proficient at sewing the tiny, tiny little fiddly pieces
Then there is a hack. What you can do is sew around the claws and turn it the right way round. You're not sewing into the claws. Then, from where you want your claws to end, you sew into and down to the open seam once you've turned it round. This gives you a paw look, without having to sew those fiddly edges. It is nowhere near as good, but it is a hack that gives you a paw-like look. Now, for the baby, what has been done with this pattern is it's actually been cut out of crafting foam. This allows you to cut round it without any of the fiddly sewing. It is fantastic for smaller paws and smaller claw-like looking edges. If you aren't proficient at sewing the fiddly little details, this is an amazing way to get that kind of a look. So you get your craft foam, you cut round it. Sorry, I don't have one to show you here. You cut round it, you still get that look, and then you're going to sew that craft foam straight into the leg. So you are still getting the look, you just aren't having that fiddly sewing aspect. Now the pattern calls to do the fiddly bits at the end, but once those fiddly bits are done and out of the way, I feel a little bit better and I can move on to doing as per the pattern. So, first thing is you sew in the contrasting head. Yes, it's a little bit fiddly, but it is not as horrible as the tiny little fiddly bits. So you sew the dart down to the nose before moving on to sew the top bit of the head in, then the head darts. Once you've done those, you're moving on to the final fiddly bit, not so much, of the ears, because you go straight round. You can see I am trying to tuck the fur in as I go. It's not extremely successful because of the type of fur this is, but do tuck your fur in to try and tuck it out the way of the seam as you go. Once you have the ears, you're going to fold them over and baste them to the head. Once both ears are attached, bearing in mind remember you are folding the ears, so once they are folded, the fold is pointing towards the outside because obviously it's like the opossum is twisting its ears to hear things. So once you have the ears in place, you are going to sew up the back of the head, leaving a gap for turning. Now, I have a wonderful stitch on my machine that reinforces the end/beginning stitch. If not, go back here so you are reinforcing around the gap. Once you have done this, you're going to attach the front and the back together. Once you are done with the head, set it to one side and then sew the dart in the body side/back. From there, you are going to sew the tail to the body back, where the tail is then attached to the body, before we sew around the back seam and around the tail. Do be careful when going around the tail to ensure that your seam allowance is the same all the way around. When you come to stuff this, you are going to need to either insert something to help with the stuffing, or you're going to need to try and get the stuffing down the end of the tail. Having an even seam allowance all the way around is going to help with this. Otherwise it's going to be a little bit fiddly and look a bit hard. Once you have done this, you're going to need to ensure that once you've sewn around the tail, you do so a little bit around the bottom. Otherwise, the stomach is going to have a bit of a gaping hole at the bottom, which you don't want. So, once you've sewn down the back, around the tail, and across the bottom, you're going to add the stomach to the body. Now, this is very, very simply down and around, making sure that if there is a hole at the bottom because you've messed up your stitches, messed up your alignment because you're using fur or something like that, just make sure that you close that hole. It's an easy fix and really nothing to be ashamed about. I missed it by about a millimetre, but obviously I didn't really want stuffing coming out the bottom, so I just quickly stitched this and made sure that it met and there was no hole at the back base. Once again, if you're using fur, try and tease the fur out on any joins, so any seams where the fur has got tucked in. You just need to tease it out. Where the fur is lying along the side of the seams, most of the fur won't have an issue, it will have popped out. You can hook into the fur and just tease it gently out, making sure that you're not going to tear your fabric at the same time. I'm actually using a tool called the purple thingy here, but you can quite as easily use a sewing needle, anything that's quite flat and small. Like I said, the tool I'm using, despite not being purple, is called the purple thingy. Once you've done all the sewing, it's back to wherever it's more comfortable for you. You are going to fill all of your parts. Again, I start with the smaller parts because that's just my personal preference. From there, you are going to sew up all the open seams, and then it's on to attaching to the body. Now, where I have sewn up the little legs and arms, I've actually left the thread there because I find that once I've sewn them up, if I use the same thread to attach them, it's less likely for them to come off because I'm not using two lots of thread and I'm not having to attach a piece of thread from scratch. Once I've filled my feet, it is time to go over to filling the tail. That's the bit that's quite fiddly. As you can see, I've used a tool which is basically a tube and something that fits in it to stuff the stuffing in. So I've done that, filled my tail, filled my body. Now you want your body to be reasonably firm, otherwise your head's going to go a bit derpy. Filled my head, sewn my head up, then attach my head to my body. Then the final thing is to place my little feet and my little arms so it's cutest. You can have these anywhere within reason. You can have it so it's reaching up for its mommy. You can have it so it's basically folding them over at the front. This is where you can use a bit of your imagination when assembling your toy yourself. now you have your amazing opossum. Thank you very much to Choly Knight for the pattern, and thank you for allowing me to do these videos. I would love you to stick around, so feel free to subscribe. I also have a Buy Me a Coffee, so if you would like to donate, which will help me buy more materials to keep these videos going, please feel free to donate. I am not saying you have to, I'm just saying if you would like to, you can buy me a coffee or more materials. Again, if you would like to stick around, please subscribe and do check out my other videos. I have more Choly Knight patterns and I also have some recipes, so come join me.